For those of you joining for the first time on the live stream, welcome. I am Amouyel, Executive Director of MIT Solve. For our Solve community and Hopin, welcome back to the main stage. What an inspiring day. There's nothing quite as motivating as spending time with our amazing Solver teams. Solve is a marketplace for social impact innovation. Last May, we all gathered for our first ever virtual Solve at MIT to discuss our 2020 challenges and to try and figure out the best way to respond to a pandemic we barely understood. And what a year it has been. In addition to the tragic loss of life, the pandemic has exacerbated existing inequalities across race, ethnicity, geography, gender, and more. Further, the renewal of the Black Lives Matter movement in the US following the death of George Floyd continues to demonstrate that we have a long way to go to contend with centuries of systemic racism and build a more just and equitable world. To create that world, one where everyone can realize their full potential, we need everyone to come to the problem-solving table, to bring their talent, their ingenuity, and their resources. Technology and innovation are not silver bullets that can magically fix all wrongs, but they are part of the answer. And we need more innovation that is designed by and for the most underserved communities. It's critical we here at MIT and Solve support diverse innovators who are developing community-based solutions. Over the last year, I've been so impressed with the grit, tenacity, and optimism of our Solver teams and members. They have stepped up to respond and adapt to the pandemic and its devastating social and economic effects. Let me give you a few examples. Solver Yiya transformed their model from a classroom approach to a fully remote system and is now able to reach thousands more students in Uganda. Pensa partnered with the Mozambique Ministry of Health to contact more than 1 million people with information about the pandemic. And in Cambridge, UK, Simprints created biometrics for vaccine delivery, a camera-based, contactless biometric product which utilizes facial recognition to verify delivery of every vaccine dose. Meanwhile, our members and partners also stepped up in big ways. Someone Else's Child Foundation and the Mortgage Family Foundation provided emergency grant funding to help our teams pivot and adapt to the crisis. Comcast Universal and the Kauffman Foundation supported a fifth challenge focused on anti-racist technology in the US. Finally, many of you, including MIT faculty, volunteered their time to serve as reviewers, judges, and mentors across all our challenges. Thank you to all. Today, we find ourselves in a new stage of this global health crisis, racing to deploy vaccines across the world while more virulent variants emerge. There is hope on the horizon, but still much work to be done to ensure the vaccine is accessible to the most vulnerable and underserved communities. At such a critical juncture, we feel very fortunate to have our next speaker here to share his insight. Noubar Afeyan is an MIT alum and a member of the MIT Corporation. He's been an engaged Solve advisor since the beginning, and I'm always grateful for his ideas and counsel. He's also been a very generous donor as the anchor to Solve Innovation Future, Solve's philanthropic venture fund. But today, Noubar is here because of his day job. In 2000, Noubar founded a life sciences venture capital company called Flagship Pioneering. And you will have heard of one of their portfolio companies that he started in 2010, Moderna. Yeah, that one. And some of you might have a shot or two in their arms which bear that name, thankfully. Joining him today is MIT's president, Rafael Reif, to discuss the latest COVID vaccine developments and how to improve health access for all. Please welcome to the main stage, Rafael Reif and Noubar Afeyan.
Hi, Noubar. It's a delight and a great honor to have this opportunity to chat with you. I'm sure you already know this, but at MIT, we're very proud of your success. And not only because you are an MIT graduate. Last spring, most of us were anxious and uncertain about the new coronavirus and holding on to the hope of a vaccine. Meanwhile, your team at Moderna was actually racing to develop one. What was that like? Were you confident you would succeed? And why do you think Moderna was so well placed to respond to this huge challenge?
Well, Rafael, I'm honored to be invited to join you today, and very much look forward to the discussion, but also to the rest of the Solve program, which I consider in extremely high regard over the last few years, what they've been able to accomplish, and I'm very glad to be involved with it. Last year was a big change for all of us, and in my case, this company that over the last 10 years had toiled at creating a brand new platform of medicine based on messenger RNA, in hindsight was poised to be able to respond to a challenge that none of us could have planned for. And by platform, I really mean a fully integrated set of capabilities that could allow us to design, very quickly make and deploy a brand new vaccine. Now, the world didn't know that before then we had already done 9 different vaccines and put them in the clinic. In 9 out of 9 times, we had neutralizing antibody levels. And while we had not taken these things to the market, because what we've all since heard, which is that vaccines take years and years to develop, we nevertheless could do a 10th. And so to your question, did we have confidence? We certainly had confidence in our ability to design, make, and test one. And we thought that if we could make neutralizing antibody, that unless there was something unusual about the immune system against this particular virus, it should have an effect. How big an effect, we didn't know. So we didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure the risk, what the risk was, what the reward was. We felt, I remember very well, January 21st, it happened to be my daughter's birthday, a daughter who now is at Sloan School doing her MBA. And on that birthday, I got a call from Davos, from the CEO of Moderna, where he was approached by a number of public health groups who were urging us to jump in even before this was a pandemic, even before we knew exactly what the threat was. And we decided that because it would test out this first of its kind technology, we should just do so. And with our partners at NIH, we literally decided overnight, the board of Moderna agreed to deploy capital to try to do this, which since led to some firsts, as the world has heard. 2 days after we had the sequence of the virus, we had the design of the vaccine. 40 days after that, we had vaccine in vials shipped to the NIH to be injected into humans, the first of which happened 44 days after the vaccine sequence was obtained. And then within the 8 months that followed, we were able to test in 30,000 people. So all of that, why were we poised in a position to do this? We had an outstanding team, all of which was in Cambridge and eventually in Norwood, Massachusetts. We had a set of partners, both at the NIH and then subsequently manufacturers in Europe, elsewhere, regulatory consultants, clinical groups. And then we had kind of a culture in the company of both recognizing the responsibility and the power of the science and the technology that had been developed. All of those made this an important thing to try to do. And I'm quite actually amazed that the one thing that we all in technology, as I know you know well, fear, which is Murphy's Law, knock on wood, Murphy's Law was on vacation, was on sabbatical for a whole year. And so many things that could have gone wrong simply did not. Doesn't mean won't be back from vacation sometime soon, but I think that was a big part of how this happened.
Well, one thing that clearly did not go wrong is that critical and dramatic decision by the board to proceed with this progress. Both the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines appear to be effective against several COVID-19 variants, which is really great news. But will those who receive the Moderna vaccine need a third dose, say after 6 or 12 months? What can you tell us about Moderna's development of those kinds of booster shots?
Well, this is really uncharted territory because interestingly, when we first went down this path, people thought this would be like influenza. In fact, it's not that much like influenza, except it might become like influenza as to the endemic phase. And we're beginning to kind of see signs of that. We've since also gone back and looked at, it seems historically that there was a prior coronavirus pandemic more than 150 years ago that might well have led to the fact that we, as we commonly know, 25% of the common cold is coronavirus strains. And it had its start someplace, and it may well have been a pandemic back then that eventually became endemic. So there is a reason to expect, although we hope not, that this ends up spreading and becoming variable enough that our ability as a collective immune system globally to combat all strains will likely lead to an ongoing battle where different strains who escape immune surveillance, if you will be able to kind of come back seasonally. And so, yes, at this point, our baseline assumption is that in some frequency, perhaps a year, perhaps we don't know, in 9 months, we may need to have booster shots. Now, more importantly, the question is that a booster shot for the same strain? Unlikely. Variable strains, that's what we're testing as we speak. We've shown already in mouse models that are very good predictors that a variant strain of the South African variant seems to be quite effective at mounting a quite specific and stronger immune response than our 1273 vaccine, the parent one. We're testing some even novel combinations of the two, where you could imagine a booster shot being half the existing vaccine and half the new one. So we're doing the experiments now. We're testing it in humans. We hope in the next month, 2 months, we'll be able to shed some more light, and then hopefully working with regulatory agencies in the US and elsewhere, we'll get the boosters ready, and then we'll be poised to do another one. Perhaps this new Indian strain that is highly concerning might be another one, etc. So we're trying to get our platform to adapt to the reality. As you and I have spoken before, this is really a fight, an evolutionary battle between a measly virus that has one thing going for it, which that it's adapted and evolved for a very, very long time, and our immune systems, which are unfortunately not connected to each other, like the internet allows us to connect, and our social tendencies, which are connected to each other. And so our social nature as social animals exposes us, our immune system defends us, but it's disconnected. And the only way to deal with it is information translated into vaccines that are information molecules that can protect as many of us as possible.
No, but I love the analogy since the first day you mentioned that to me. Look, clearly the Moderna is focused on more than the COVID-19 vaccine. So what can you tell us about some of the other vaccines and treatments under development?
The platform was developed both to be able to enable therapeutics as well as vaccines. In fact, before 2020, we had roughly the same number of therapeutic programs in development. Some had entered human trials. And as well, we had done, as I mentioned, a number of vaccines. That will continue. In therapeutics, we're making, if you think about the platform, what we've enabled is an information molecule, messenger RNA, when injected into the body, whether it's intramuscular or IV injection, converts itself into a protein by using the cells in the patient or subject's body. So you can use that to make drugs against cancer, drugs against inflammatory disorders, drugs against rare diseases, all of which we're developing, therapeutics, but also then expose any number of antigens for other infectious diseases, RSV, CMV, Zika, where we have advanced programs, and a number of other ones. We've announced, for example, recently we're going after flu in a very important way. We think that down the line, a combination of a flu vaccine and a coronavirus vaccine may be an ideal way to protect certainly the older population and the most vulnerable. And so we think this platform will enable us to be able to use, instead of building large manufacturing facilities to make living cells or biologicals from that, these RNA molecules are essentially chemicals. And it's an interesting mix between the old pharmaceutical industry of chemistry and the new biotech industry, which has previously been living virus or cell-derived products, but in this case, it's not. So the transition is going in, but I think we now have 24 named clinical programs, each going after either diseases or treatments or preventions of diseases.
Well, it's just truly fascinating. And keep at it. We all need that. Look, as more and more people in the US get vaccinated, lack of access is still a problem, particularly for many underserved communities and communities of color. And some people are reluctant to get the vaccine. So what role do you think Moderna and other companies producing vaccines should play in expanding access and responding to concerns about vaccine efficacy and safety?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's a complex one because there are historical reasons for the hesitancy, especially in communities of color. There is we just underwent a year of information that was mixed with a lot of misinformation, and people's emotions and fears were intermixed in ways that it's very, very difficult to feel confident about anything. And the vaccines came up in such a time frame that people assumed that automatically it can't possibly be safe. In fact, many, many people were on television espousing to that view, that experts for that matter, that if it's done in less than 5 years, it's got to be unsafe, all of which is untrue, but nevertheless, people get confused. So I think our job as a government, the public health sector, the medical community, and the vaccine makers is to basically make sure that the facts get out, make sure that we actually engage in dialogue about this. As an example, I had a great opportunity last Friday to be down in Miami to visit the Jesse Trice Community Health Center, fully serving inner city and communities of color. And I witnessed them administering vaccines to a whole host of people, drive-through, walk-in. And these were people that really felt relieved, and they were seeing members of their own community acting as the nurses deploying the vaccine. And you just have to rely on this incredible force that we have of healthcare workers who really do take this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to join the fight. It's almost like a kind of a military battle, but where everybody can get involved in the fight so that we can stop this. So I just think we have to be there, talk about it. I've been interviewed a lot where I've been asked, what do you tell people who have hesitancy? My first response is actually understanding, because I do understand that depending on what you've heard before and what your beliefs are, there may well be hesitancy. But the question is, what do you do then? And for me, it's about getting advice from doctors, advice from the government, public health officials, Dr. Fauci on down, and then just make a judgment yourself, which is how much more risk are we taking by not being vaccinated, and how much more risk do we have of spreading the virus by not being vaccinated to people we love, inadvertently, unknowingly. And so any more than we should ignore traffic lights, we should walk into rush hour traffic and take such risks. I think everybody has to make their own choice. We can do that. We have a freedom of choice. But I think in the end, if people are given the information and recognize their responsibility, we will get a lot of people vaccinated, enough to contain this virus.
Thank you. Terrific answer, Noubar. How might we focus our efforts? I mean, how would we focus our efforts to ensure that the rest of the world is protected against COVID-19 and future pandemics? I've heard you talk about the need for a global pathogen shield. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there's things we can do right now, and then there's things we must do going forward. So the things we can do right now, it has been quite frustrating to us and to me personally, having been involved over the last 20 years in development projects in different parts of the world, to basically see the degree of attention paid to securing supplies for the country I live in, the United States, the country I came from, Canada, from Europe, where my wife came from, but not so much in many other places in the world, where there was an attempt to try to gather a group of folks together to try to solve this. But in fact, it moved slowly. The countries were not willing to contribute in the beginning, and it created quite a scary and messy situation. I'm pleased to say that that's improving. I'm pleased to say just today, Moderna announced that finally we've reached an agreement with COVAX, our partners at COVAX and Gavi, to be able to supply up to 500 million doses of our vaccine, starting in the fourth quarter, going into all of next year. There are a number of other sources they've already secured. And so we're pleased by that, because we also now have World Health Organization emergency authorization, which is needed to get the vaccine into the 90 countries that are low-income and middle-income countries. So all of that are good first steps. We need to do more. We look forward to engaging with a number of kind of multilateral efforts to do this. I look forward to the US government, once we start fulfilling the obligation to provide vaccines to the country, to start playing a leadership role in the rest of the world. I do believe that the US can and should lead here. We happen to be the innovators in this space. The US government played a huge role in enabling this vaccine to be invented, tested, made, delivered, scaled up. And why not? It should actually make sure that the whole world gets the benefit of technology that's largely been developed in the US. And so I look forward to all of that. And I do believe, watching certainly the current situation in India, which I'm afraid is not going to stay there. It's going to continue afflicting the Southern Hemisphere next, and just being horrible to see that we all have to kind of buy into this, and also encourage our representatives in the US that we need to do more, we can do more.
Well, it's great news you just shared with us, Noubar. Thank you for that. How do you see the future of healthcare and biotechnology following the current pandemic period? What changes, if any, do we need in healthcare and public health in order to prevent and protect against such threats?
Well, that's really very much dear to my heart, because it so happens that about 3 years ago, actually before the pandemic, I hope we didn't jinx it, we started at Flagship with colleagues to start working on what we can do with all the science and technology we're developing upstream of disease. It's always been a difficult thing for me to witness that we tend to wait for things to be kind of royally broken, if I can call it that, as to our health, before we make extremely complex and therefore expensive treatments for that otherwise really broken state. And I know as an engineer, I had the benefit of an MIT education, that problems that get further and further complicated and systems level are going to be harder to fix at a systems level. And if we can act on it much earlier. So, we call this generally a way of doing preemptive medicine. Health security is one aspect of that, having to do with infectious disease. But just generally, what if the brightest minds took all their tools, all their attention, and said, let's work on delaying, preventing, preempting, doing whatever we can to disease before it's known as a disease? Because we know the pathways that are beginning to lead to cardiovascular diseases or autoimmune diseases or cancer. We don't need a diagnosis to know that it's where it's headed with a very high likelihood. So what if we had a set of interventions, not necessarily therapeutics, when we detect, not necessarily diagnose, these conditions? And I believe the next generation or two is going to work on this. This is not just public health in the traditional sense of the word, because when we talk about public health, we feel like we need to protect everyone on the planet, which of course we need to have equity available to everyone, but we don't need the same treatment for all. We can actually focus on subsets of populations that have that vulnerability, identify them, and get them the appropriate intervention. So I think if anything, this pandemic and the memory of the people who lost their lives would be well served if, as a community, we move upstream. That's my firm belief. I certainly am committed, and my firm is committed in a big way, and I hope others will join as well.
Oh, thank you, Noubar. This is going to be for our Solve entrepreneurs and any entrepreneur, actually. You have been, Noubar, a successful venture founder many times over with your firm, Flagship Pioneering. And you have some fascinating observations. I remember conversations you and I have had about the word entrepreneurship. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs who want to get started in this business of building companies that take on the world's great challenges?
Since we're short on time, I invite people to look up some of the other conversations we've had, but I'll say a few things at a high level. First, leap more, increment less. Second, adopt an evolutionary mindset, because through variation and selection, you can find novelty and persistence and perseverance that no design-based, goal-based approach will get you. Immigrate, embody an immigrant mindset, leave where you are, immigrate to where you want the world to be, and then invite other people to join you in immigrating. And finally, be professional at this. Don't think of this as some kind of a game or a lottery. Be professional, be dedicated, be accountable for the work you're doing.
Well, Noubar, this has been the shortest 20 minutes I've ever experienced. I thank you for spending time with us. And I thank you sincerely for all you do to support MIT and to support Solve. Thank you, Noubar.
Thank you, Rafael. And let me just ask everyone listening to be more and more involved in Solve. I think it's a great, great project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael and Noubar. What an incredible conversation. We have more in store for you soon, including a conversation with will.i.am and Vilas. But first, an exciting announcement. Over the last few years, Solve has selected 165 Solver teams from over 43 countries. We saw early on that you could be a Solver at any age. Our youngest Solver was 13 when she was selected. And as part of MIT, I'm also constantly reminded of the genius and power of young people. Gen Z is especially driven to want to lead lives of purpose and build a better future for all, one that is more just, equitable, and sustainable. With this in mind, Solve has spent the last year consulting on and designing a new program for young people aged 24 and under. So today, I'm really excited to launch SolveEd. Young people hold the empathy, power, and ingenuity to solve world problems. We want to help them on their journey. SolveEd is designed to spark a sense of agency in young people, encouraging, inspiring, and supporting them to become problem solvers in their community and the world. But we can't do this alone. That is why we're bringing together a community of youth organizations, education providers, and other cross-sector leaders to ignite the next generation of innovators. I want to thank our anchor funder for SolveEd, Carrie Morgridge and the Morgridge Family Foundation, who are long-term supporters of Solve, as well as the Richelle Foundation and the Posen Social Innovation Prize, who all committed initial funding to the program. We're also launching this exciting program with our inaugural SolveEd members, other universities and youth-serving organizations from all around the world. Thank you. If you are interested in joining us as a SolveEd participant, a mentor, a funder, or SolveEd member, please do not hesitate to get in touch with my team or through the Solve website. For those of you in Hopin, you will also be able to join the SolveEd community session tomorrow from 1 to 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And the best way to showcase the power and genius of youth is through these next two speakers. Gitanjali Rao is a student and a 3-times inventor who used MIT App Inventor to help bring her ideas to life. At now 16 years old, she was recently selected as Time's first ever Kid of the Year. She will be joined in conversation by Emma Yang, who at 13 was selected as a 2017 Brain Health Challenge Solver. Emma is now an incoming college freshman and a founder of Timeless, a facial recognition app she has built to help her own grandmother recognize and connect with loved ones while battling Alzheimer's disease. Trust me when I tell you, these two will be running the world someday soon. Following their conversation, we will be joined again by President Reif to introduce our next panel with will.i.am and long-term Solve advisor Vilas, President and Trustee of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. We are so excited for these two panels, and I'm sure you are too. So let's get started with Gitanjali and Emma.
Hi, everyone. Hello, Solve at MIT. My name is Emma Yang. I'm an MIT Solver and the founder of Timeless, a startup that helps to empower Alzheimer's patients, their families, friends, and caregivers using artificial intelligence-based facial recognition technology and to help them with the daily challenges of the disease. I'm so excited to be here today talking to Gitanjali Rao. Gitanjali is a fellow innovator, a young innovator, and inventor. I'm a huge fan of your work, so very excited for this. So since this is Solve at MIT and Solve is all about problem-solving technology, I thought I'd start out by asking what drove you to solve the problems that you've been addressing through technological innovation and technology instead of by any other means? And how can we convince other kids our age to turn to science technology to tackle our most pressing problems?
Yeah, and I guess to kind of answer that two-part question, I'll kind of put out a two-part answer here. But to essentially address this first part, I think the biggest thing is access and knowledge to technology is limited for students, right? For us. And while there are other means to solve this with the talent that we have, science and tech is almost like reading and writing in today's day and age for tomorrow's solutions. And I think we just need to take advantage of that. So just based on those ideas, I naturally got inclined with the vast amount of resources that we have through, just the internet and through remote learning and through virtual resources, because that's where I saw the most opportunity to grow and learn as an innovator. And to essentially address that second part, the best way to convince other students or other kids our age to turn to science and tech is definitely to start slow, right? Provide them with a process that they can refer to and share role models like you, of course, who have done something similar. Because I think it's important to address that every problem doesn't need to be big and every solution doesn't need recognition to make a difference. We need to start normalizing the importance of small innovations to solve small problems as well. Challenges such as MIT Solve can obviously be such a huge motivating factor to start and take that first step. And I'm doing my small part by conducting innovation workshops all over the globe where I have students come up with a small idea and try to take it to a solution that they're comfortable with building further. And I think that's just the little bit of inspiration and drive that any sort of student needs.
Yeah, and that really resonates with me. I think, when I first started coding, I was, about 6 years old, and I started with Scratch, and you and I have been fortunate, we grew up in a world where we have the internet running and we have things like, tools are online, books, websites that really teach us how to code. I started, with just games, animations that grew into a tool that, I could use to help my grandmother. And now, expanding that to an issue that really impacts millions of people around the world and helping families like mine. And so, really love to hear that. In your life so far, you've built tech-based solutions around opioid addiction, unsafe drinking water, and cyberbullying. In a world faced with so many challenges, how do you think aspiring young entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general should go about identifying the ones that they want to address and solve?
Yeah, I love that question. I think the first thing to really address that is by identifying that there are problems out there, right? We're growing up in this place where we're seeing problems that have never been seen before. And some of these problems still exist, like human rights and, access to education and natural resources, as well as quite literally, we're all sitting at home in the middle of a pandemic right now. And aspiring entrepreneurs should really consider almost this aspect of empathy and kindness, as well as community awareness as their central theme to kind of invest in a solution. I guess with my work, the biggest thing that has really come out of it is this idea that my work is driven by my motivation to quite literally put a smile on someone's face. Whether my work is big or small, the end goal is to help someone out there in the world around us. And sometimes it's easy to get stuck in abstract terminologies and process definitions. But I think at any given point in time, we need to take a step back and realize, why are we doing this? And the reason for this is kindness. Innovation is using science and technology for kindness. And that's how I've continued to look at it. And we all want to grow up in a world where kindness prevails. And if each and every one of us can make that step to impact one other person, there's obviously going to be a cascading impact or a ripple effect on the problems that we can solve in our community.
Yeah, and do you think that, being a young entrepreneur and a young innovator has kind of influenced that lens of kind of kindness and an optimistic view of how we can use technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the ability to take risks and then time in our hands to fail and learn is actually probably our biggest asset more than anything, right? I like to say that I am doing what I'm doing because of my age, because we're not yet boxed, right? We're not boxed in this way to follow a certain method or a certain way to innovate or to essentially apply for a job where I have to do only this. We're allowed to basically think beyond what we think the box is and also just create an environment for us where our creativity thrives. And along with this, we have, older peers and stuff who can have the experience to guide and mentor us across the way. And those are some of the people that I'm most thankful for and who have been most valuable in my journey as well. And apart from that, today, several professors and experts are ready to guide students. And we have programs in place where universities are actually opening up their research facilities for even little things like high school internships or even middle school internships sometimes. And really taking advantage of that younger age group is something that we're seeing more and more often and something that will continue to vouch for because I think that is so incredibly important.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think, as a young founder myself, I really saw how I think fundraising is something that, it's a huge issue. It's a huge part of every entrepreneur's journey. And I think for me, it was especially true because, it's one thing to be, young and saying you have an idea and you want to create this or that. It's another to go up to VCs or pitch competitions and say, well, here's my idea. Will you give me money to start doing this? And so I think, definitely kind of in that aspect, I think, there is a sense of, a less in fear of failure and a willing to take on challenges that young people really have. And that's something that, I'm really excited to see that you are also, taking advantage of that. So today, Solve is launching a program for youth innovators, Solve Ed. The program will be giving young people the opportunity to learn about and practice skills for social entrepreneurship. And I'm especially excited about the ways that it'll do this while bringing young people from all around the world together. So what do we talked a little about, optimism, a lesson fear of failure, but, what advantages do young innovators have over their older peers, do you think?
Ooh, good question. And it almost resonates with that same idea, right? Over our older peers, one of the biggest things that we have is our opportunity to be able to kind of mesh in with their interests. It's almost like contrasting ideas, but also similar ideas. We're willing to think big and we're willing to dream big and then think back to reality. When people ask me what's the biggest piece of advice, it's dream big and then think back to reality. And the reason I say that is because we're kids and we're allowed to dream big and we have the time to make those dreams into reality.
Yeah, and what ways would you be excited to learn from young entrepreneurs living and working in other countries?
Yeah, so I can even share a story here. So recently I conducted a workshop for students in the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, which was absolutely incredible. And those students actually walked about 45 minutes just to attend it, right? I take internet access for granted, and I was kind of amazed by their zeal to learn with the latest resources in front of them. And another example was when I conducted a workshop for a girls' school in Afghanistan, and they had security concerns on what they're allowed to do and what they can't. And I have so many more stories like this for students in other West African countries and places in Asia as well. And it was just so eye-opening, right? That they were motivated to be entrepreneurs and innovators in spite of all the constraints in front of them. And the biggest lesson learned is that a lot of us are privileged and not all of them are. So the more that we can do to offer and share our resources and knowledge, the better. So that's what really just what I've learned from my peers around me, and especially the people that I work with, is collaboration is the best thing driving our future. And we should continue to do so. We should continue to make an impact and really emphasize the idea that age, race, and gender doesn't have anything to do with who's an innovator, who's an entrepreneur, because right now we need to maximize innovation and creativity.
That's amazing, and absolutely. The United Nations World Report, Youth Report, estimates that we'll need to create 600 million new jobs in the next 15 years to meet youth employment needs. This is an urgent global challenge, and youth entrepreneurship could offer a much-needed solution. Providing opportunities for our peers, for people that we see are underserved or in need of support. So first, what barriers to innovation need to be dismantled in order to expand opportunity to young entrepreneurs everywhere, in your opinion?
Oh, I bet I could list quite a few here, but one is definitely inequality in education. Internet access and resources availability are absolutely the first thing to solve before we move ahead any further. Apart from that, something as simple as access to the internet, safety and security is the right of every individual, just like the right to have access to clean drinking water or clean air. And I think those are the first few things that we need to absolutely kind of break down. It's this idea that we need to bring in more opportunities for everyone across the world. And in order to do that, we need to take advantage of the resources that we have and be generous to provide that to others.
Absolutely. And I think, access to technology is something that, we in the United States and as people who are, working in the tech sector are really taking for granted, as you said. And, I think that, we think of tech as being so ubiquitous, there's that, there's an app for that, kind of culture. And I think, I saw that, on the other end of the spectrum, working with the Alzheimer's population and realizing that Alzheimer's and really the elderly in general are very underserved by technology. We want to build things like the next Uber, the next Facebook, the next Instagram, things that are meant for young people who are already involved in technology. But there are a lot of, blind spots in technology, places that we're not looking yet and places that, young people perhaps, can see these blind spots more clearly and to help to solve for them.
Quite a few, actually. I was having like a conversation recently as well. And a lot of what I was hearing was this idea that, Gen Z are definitely more out of touch with science and technology because they're always on screens. And I feel like, that's one perspective, but there's so many, I totally agree regarding blind spots in age groups, blind spots in, just this world of what technology can be used for. We've all decided on like something as cool as, beveled edges or Bluetooth technology. And that's cool and all, but we need to focus on coming up with bigger solutions to solve bigger problems.
Absolutely. And, that point about, being on the screens all the time and, getting, all your information through there. I think, there's also, and you were talking about education about tech, also the awareness of, the way machine learning and AI is impacting the way that young people learn, how we are scrolling through Facebook and Instagram and we're seeing these, information that we're believing to be true and are really resonating with our own views when that really could be, tailored to us. And we're not really aware of that. I think, that's another way that, access to technology and access to education about technology is really coming into play. So what types of support do you think young entrepreneurs need to most thrive?
Right. And I think the biggest thing is guidance from experts, right? Role models who have quite literally done it before, and universities and organizations who are ready to come in with basically arms wide open and greet you, and who are ready to open their doors for that curiosity and creativity to thrive, almost for them to be able to do that for us. I like to say I am who I am because of my mentors and my role models who have supported me, as well as those organizations and universities who have opened up their labs for me, even if it was like a tour of the lab or to get a feel of what opportunities are for the future. I was actually fortunate enough to get to go tour the Department of Chemistry lab at MIT and still have, the vision of all the resources available there and the potential as well. I guess, just labs in general, I'd never been able to kind of go in and experience it actually until I was at the University of Colorado, Denver, and I've conducted research there since I was about 12 years old and did a lot of research at Denver Water's water quality lab when I was 11. And I hope for that one day where every youth out there has that opportunity, right? I think everybody would really be able to take advantage of that growth mindset, continue going forward with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've also done some, research, with more, I started off with, from more app development, looking at, timeless and trying to develop that perspective. And now going into kind of the research world and seeing how, the kind of the back end of science, the academia, the researchers are really driving that kind of stuff. I think, it's been great that, as young people, we've both had the opportunity to see both sides of the curtain. And I'm really excited to see how SolveEd can really be bringing out the social innovation side. Well, thank you so much, Gitanjali, for having this conversation with us. This has been really great and really inspiring to hear your work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. And again, I'm Rafael Reif, MIT's president. I'd like to share one quick observation. As I noted this morning, we're experiencing the heightened anxiety of living in a time of crisis. But Solve offers the inspiration of practical hope. And it is because of all of you. To all the innovators here today, of all ages, I deeply admire your ingenuity and dedication. To conclude today's program, I would like to introduce our next conversation. will.i.am has contributed to music, pop culture, technology, and education in many different ways. You may know he has received 7 Grammy Awards and 2 Emmys. But you may be surprised to learn that he was also awarded an honorary fellowship at the Institution of Engineering and Technology. Will is a technology and AI entrepreneur and a committed STEM advocate. But my favorite fact about him is that he is the first person to send a song to Mars. Broadcast live from the Curiosity rover, it is aptly titled Reach for the Stars. Will is a strong believer in the power of international connectivity as a tool for creating and collaborating remotely to solve problems. I believe our Solver team certainly share. Joining Will in conversation is Vilas Dhar, a Solve advisor and a leading voice on technological equity. Vilas serves as president of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, which is committed to advancing AI and data solutions to create a more equitable, sustainable future. We are incredibly grateful that among the many ways the foundation supports Solve, they have created the AI for Humanity Prize. I know this will be a terrific conversation, and I'm delighted to welcome Will and Vilas to Solve at MIT.
Thank you, Rafael. I'm so delighted to be here with you today. And particularly to be here with technologist, entrepreneur, philanthropist, my friend, will.i.am. Will, I'm so delighted to be in this chat. I know that we're talking today to MIT solvers, a group of people who are setting out to do two things that I know is really important to both of our hearts. The first, to figure out how you use technology to solve some of the greatest challenges facing humanity, itself a really worthy endeavor. But the second, a little bit more nuanced, to figure out how we use technology to let us achieve our most human aspirations, our ambitions, our ideas of what it is to be human. As I've thought about these two challenges, I've been reflecting on the idea that technology has moved from the idea of building products, more hardware, more phones, more watches, to building the kinds of things that actually let us connect more deeply, that let us be more creative, that let us think about what it is that we want to achieve in our individual selves and our communities and build more. But with that power also comes a responsibility to think about design. How do we design technology in a way that supports a design of a society that we think is ethical and equitable and sustainable? And one of the things that I think we've come to is the idea that to design that world, it's not enough to just leave it in the hands of technologists. We need to bring in philosophers, artists, people who bring lived experience to the table. Will, there's nobody I can have this conversation with more than I think of somebody who brings all of those ideas and philosophies to this work. I wonder if you'd share with us a little bit about your work at the IAngel Foundation, how you think about the integration of STEAM into classrooms and building pathways for everyone, about inclusion into this world we're bringing.
So I started the IAngel Foundation, it's a little over 11 years ago. And we focus on robotics, engineering, autonomy, computer science, and getting kids in the inner city and encouraging them down this path. And the reason why I think that's the most important thing to focus on as a somebody that's made it out the ghetto, that has the ability to go back to the ghetto. It's super important because the world tomorrow is super autonomous. It's super robotic. And there's not many people from the Black and brown community writing the algorithms and training the data. And if we're barely scratching the surface on fixing police brutality in our community. Imagine what 30 years looks like, and no one, is brought up to speed on, autonomy literacy or understanding the complexities of robotics and these, predictive machines that are going to be deciding, how we live and how, the conditions of life in the inner city, all the way down from teaching a child in the inner city. We've seen how COVID shook up the world where kids are learning from home. That's just on this iPhone that was designed when the world wasn't shut down. This device told us that now you teach on it. There's cases where parents are like, my son, he was failing miserably last year, and now being taught at home, he's getting A's. Why was your kid getting A's? Is it because the teacher is slacking off? We can't calculate just how teaching is being done during COVID, but that brought up insight where now we need new types of teaching machines, let alone computing machines. But when it comes to teaching machines that, can design how it's teaching specifically to the child's needs, that's pretty awesome if you think about it. But who is writing the algorithms to make sure it's morally correct? We know of data biases. Is that also going to show up in the algorithm on machines that are helping to teach kids? Is it going to be, a data bias is going to find themselves in police drones? Are data biases going to show up in, diagnosis and people's premiums on their health insurance go up because of other machines that were calculating and learning all their behaviors from toys that they played when they were 10. Like all these unknowns we need to prepare for. So the diversity is now an ultra urgent thing that we have to solve. Not diversity just for, the workplace, but in preparing tomorrow's place. You need a diverse, not only musicians and, creatives a part of the process. You need Black, white, brown, rich, poor. You need a plethora of folks that are involved in the creating of these tools, or else you're going to have folks that feel like they're not represented. You're going to have folks that are like, you don't speak for me. We have that in politics. Imagine when the machine is cognitive and, ultra predictive and suggestive, giving you suggestions and predicting what you're probably going to do 10 years from now. If people don't look like me that built those things, well, damn, what the F? It's super important. It's just the most important crossroads that we've ever had, or else we're going to have some crazy tomorrow. Right now it's crazy. It's crazy if you're a Black man in America, a Black woman in America, a brown woman or man in America. It's crazy if you're living in the inner city and you think the police is supposed to protect you, but it's harming you. It's nuts. Now, what does tomorrow look like? When the stop sign or the street light is also a drone.
Yeah. Well, as you talk about this, I'm drawn back to the core message here, right? Technology can be something that propagates the power structure we've built, can be something that propagates the inequality that exists in our society today. But it doesn't have to be. A lot of what you're talking about is how do we take the technology out of the hands of people who are trying to propagate the existing infrastructure and give it back to the people who are living the problems that need to be addressed, who are living the lives of aspiration that technology can support. We think a lot about something that we at the foundation call an idea framework, right? A lot of this will be familiar: inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. Those aren't just words about how we think about the world. We have to actually couch the creation of new technologies right at the heart of those ideas. We talked, I think, earlier today with an organization called Waukesha AI, who won the AI for Humanity Prize. And what they've done is set out to say, you know what, a lot of the work that's out there around natural language processing or translation, it's concentrating on the languages that exist today because of a system of power. How do we take the same tools and apply them to dying or extinct languages that are held closely by Indigenous peoples? And instead of just saying, we'll come in and capture those languages for you, how do we embed those tools directly in those communities so that people can become stewards, not just of their own languages, but their own identities? Mm-hmm. Right? We see it with groups like the Hidden Genius Project, a group that I know you and I have talked about before, right? That's not thinking about these big picture questions of building a diverse workforce so we can build better technology. They're thinking about how you put technological skills in the hands of young Black men in America right now so they individually can take agency about their career paths and what they want to do in their lives. Now, of course, that's going to lead to a better technological infrastructure in the future. But we have to start from the intention of saying, how do we put it right in the hands of the people that are most vulnerable? You talk a lot about this, right? And so I'm curious what you're inspired by in diverse, in underserved communities. Where are you seeing people actually taking ownership of their tech? And I'm going to ask you also, where are you seeing them bringing their creativity and their imagination and their aspiration to what that tech does for them?
The little sparks that I see are what give me optimism, but they're little sparks.
Yeah.
It should be igniting and the brightest light, just from an American competitive point of view. If you're looking from the viewpoint of America and how it competes, you would think every single inner city would not only have a basketball court and a football field, it would have computer science and robotics and autonomy in every single classroom from K through 12. But it's not. But what I saw is kids that were embarrassed that their fathers. I come from an all Mexican neighborhood. So the kids that joined my robotics program were ashamed of their fathers because they worked odd jobs and hung out by Home Depot to go fix people's houses in Beverly Hills. They didn't realize the value of their father up until their father helped them build their robot that helped them win the regional. It's when they saw what their dad can do. And now they have a different perspective on building, but they were never given the opportunity to value what their kid did, because Hollywood and LA and popular culture, they deem that as a low paying job. When building is one of the best creative things to do, whether you're building a shed or you're fixing someone's yard or you're building a house. The builders are the builders. At what point in time do we look at that as not cool or not valuable?
Yeah.
But I saw it firsthand with my robotics team when Cynthia's dad helped them build their robot, and how far not only did it take the team, but how far it took their appreciation for building. And it connected, father and daughter. It connected team and parent. And if we can get every single inner city to compete in robotics, as just like it is that we compete with sports, treating robotics like sport is a recipe for an amazing tomorrow.
Will, I'm so taken by that idea, right? Soccer fields and basketball courts and robotics labs. I was very lucky. I grew up the child of immigrants in rural Illinois, but I happened to grow up 6 blocks away from a center for supercomputing that the government had put in Champaign, Illinois. So I grew up on one side, really exposed to lots of interesting devices and toys. I learned how to code video games when I was very young. But I'll tell you the part that shaped my philosophy, and it feels so connected to your stories. I'd go back to India, where my family's from, and I'd sit down with my grandfather, who was a very smart man, even though he'd only gone through 2nd grade, right? That was the last year of schooling he got. I tried to show him all this stuff that I had built and say, you know what? I'm excited because you're excited for the toys and the tech. But tell me how it makes my life better. How does it make the life of a villager in the field better? How does it make the life of a kid who's aspiring to have a family better? It seems like we have to have both of those stories, right? One is we have to create access. And the second is we have to put right at the center of the conversation purpose. What is it we're trying to build together? And I want to come back to this idea that takes more than just technology and technologists. So as you work with these young men and women across the country in an exceptional program that gives people access to skills, I'm also thinking about the stories they're being exposed to about what it means to be a young person of color in the world that we live in today, and how technology can actually solve some of the problems they face and how they address them. I'm thinking about how technology advances equity, but at the same time, equity advances technology. Does that resonate for you? And what are you kind of seeing these kids doing that is shaping that worldview into the skills they're building?
You drive down the street and you see these huge buildings if you live in the city. And in popular culture, you don't aim to compete with the people that built the buildings. You go to a restaurant and you go to the restroom, and the maintenance manager or the janitor, we don't value in popular culture their position to keep everything moving and clean and working. And then you turn on the TV. No, very rarely does someone say, man, how is this TV working? We're fascinated by the people that singing on the TV or acting on the TV. And every year there's an Oscars or an Emmy, and we watch them walk the red carpet. And we watch them receive that Grammy. And I know that because I've won Grammys. And very rarely, probably never, does anyone go up there and accept an award and thank the technologist that made the camera, that made the lights, that made the microphone, the keyboard. The engineers are invisible.
Yeah.
But why? Why can't engineers be celebrated? Why can't all the innovators, the tinkers, the folks that are spinning the boards and creating the firmware, and OTA programmers, algorithm writers, data trainers, the data scientists, why can't all these folks be the Michael Jordans and be visible like LeBron James? Yep. Why can't all the folks, the engineers that made that skyscraper safe in a fault line called the San Andreas Fault, where I live in Los Angeles, why can't we know their name in popular culture?
Well,
it's not as if that industry all the industry around engineering and science and robotics isn't one of the wealthiest industries in the world with tons and tons of money pumped into it. Like, where do we go wrong? How do we inspire these kids to want this path, to be involved in this conversation? And sorry for running around.
No, I love it.
What you told me just inspired me to look at, like, why and what do we have to do to get that a part of our, the fabric of popular culture.
Well, I love that answer. I'm inspired by you. I'm inspired by this image that we've created together of a future that's architected by all of us. It's not so much about who we identify and lift up, but how we champion those who are the most imaginative, the most creative, the ones who are building a better future for everyone. I want to thank you for taking this time with me. And I want to say to all of the solvers out there, these are the aspirations that we know you hold. And we can't wait to see what you do with them as you go forward. So thank you to you all. Thank you, Will. Thank you, MIT Solve. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Will and Vilas, for such a lively and inspiring conversation. As will.i.am said, tech innovators of color shouldn't be little sparks of hopes, but the brightest lights. So, some exciting news and hot off the press. I'm thrilled to announce that today, the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation pledged another $200,000 in funding for our 2021 challenges through the AI for Humanity Prize. So that means that we're now over $2 million in available funding. Thank you so much, Vilas, Liz, and the team at McGovern. And I just wanted to come back for a minute to the exclusive news you heard here today from Noubar Afeyan, the founder of Chairman of Moderna. They're committing 500 million doses for the COVAX program for low-income countries. This is big news and critical to recognize the role we all can play to ensure health security. As the day comes to a close, I want to say congratulations once again to the 2020 Solve class. It's been an honor to watch you fearlessly champion progress through this last year, refusing to be slowed down no matter what 2020 threw at you. I can't wait to watch the connections made today come to life and become partnerships that advance your work and your impact. When we come back tomorrow at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time, we will start looking to our 2021 global challenges on digital inclusion, equitable classrooms, resilient ecosystems, anti-racist technology in the US, health security and pandemics, as well as our Indigenous Communities Fellowship. Tomorrow, you will also have the chance to hear from our Digital Inclusion Challenge Ambassador, founder and CEO of Zoom, Eric Yuan, and Jean Case, Chairman of the National Geographic Society and CEO of Case Impact Network. We will also be announcing a new round of Solve Innovation Future Investments. Wow, there's still so much to do. To close us out, here's more about our 2021 global challenges. And we have not yet had time to update the video, but it is in fact over $2 million. After that, those of you who want to hop in can stay for open networking. Thank you for a great day of solving, and see you tomorrow.
At MIT Solve, we find and support promising social entrepreneurs with solutions to pressing global challenges. In 2021, thanks to our partners, we have nearly $2 million in funding for solver teams, plus access to MIT's innovation ecosystem and the Solve community. We are looking for our next class of innovators tackling one of these 5 global challenges. Challenge 1: Digital inclusion. More than half of the global population remains disconnected from the online world, unable to digitally access jobs, trainings, and markets. Connecting the rest of the world could add $6.7 trillion to the economy and lift 500 million people out of poverty. How can everyone have access to the digital economy? Challenge 2: Health security and pandemics. The world was unprepared for COVID-19, with more than 2 million lives lost to the pandemic, and underserved populations hit the hardest. To reduce the risk of future threats, we must address the weaknesses in our health systems. How can communities prepare for, detect, and respond to emerging pandemics and health security threats? Challenge 3: Equitable classrooms. An estimated 1.5 billion primary and secondary learners have had their education disrupted by the pandemic. This exacerbates pre-existing inequalities around wealth, gender, linguistics, ethnic and geographic lines. How can all young learners have access to quality, safe, and equitable learning environments? Challenge 4: Resilient ecosystems. Humans have degraded over 75% of the Earth's land area. Functioning ecosystems are the backbone of society, and they are in dire need of restoration and preservation. How can communities sustainably protect, manage, and restore their local ecosystems? Challenge 5: Anti-racist technology in the US. Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the US have created resilient and culturally rich communities despite centuries of institutionalized racism and oppression. The pandemic and a new wave of harmful technologies have further exacerbated disparities in the US. How can communities of color use technology to advance racial equity and access economic opportunity, health, and safety? If you have tech-based solution to one of these challenges, you could be one of our next Solver teams.